Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of the Influence Continuum. And today we have Mike Brown with us. I want to let our listeners know who have been listening to our podcast and following us for a while. I did an interview recently with Daniela Mastanek-Young and about how she was raised in the Children of God cult and joined the military, became a captain of intelligence, went to Afghanistan, exited. And that last conversation we had, we talked a lot about applying the BITE model to the military and her experiences. And it was a fascinating discussion. And I had the opportunity to meet Mike Brown, my guest today, who was raised in a different cult, Scientology, and had a dramatically different experience in the military, which I think is fascinating and very important. We can talk, flesh out all the little details, but Mike is an extraordinary human being. Let me just give you a little backstory. Well, first, I want to say that he got out of Scientology at 27. He tried to get away at 15, I think he told me, Mike, but got out and joined the military at 27. You flourished in the Army, you said. You served 5 combat tours between Iraq and Afghanistan and have been in the service for 20 years. You are a Chinook helicopter pilot extraordinaire and now trainer, but you were even shot down in the battlefield. We'll chat about that. I mean, you have so many certifications, I don't even want to list them, but we'll put that in the blog for folks in the military who want to know your backstory. And I talked to you about the Daniela episode. You read the book and you said, I actually, her husband, who was a helicopter gunship pilot. Anyway, we'll get into all of that. So Scientology is different than the Children of God from all points of view because it's kind of militaristic in the first place. So that's one element. We're going to talk about the fact that Daniela was a woman for the first time going into combat. That was different from your experience. But you were older and you were brought into Scientology, I believe, at age 7. So you weren't actually born in the cult. You had some normalcy, perhaps, before. And your father was a Marine officer and a disabled Vietnam veteran who got into Scientology. So got you in. And then before we finished our talk today, we want to talk about your mom and how Scientology treats older members and their scams to extort money out of them as well. So I'm sure I missed a lot, but Mike Brown, thank you for your service. Thank you for being willing to share your story with Scientology and the military.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate having you on. And I also just want to recognize how important it was to be able to read your book, Combating Cult Mind Control. I wish I would have done it years before I did, but actually being able to put this thing within a frame, because a lot of people that I'd confided in over the years, they say, well, what is a cult? And it's hard to define that unless you have, an actual process for doing so. And creating that process and all your work, I just think is absolutely pivotal to the field. So just thank you for starting. And I appreciate the kind words of introduction as well.
Yeah, and I'll just say, everybody knows the Moonies are a cult. I mean, those mass weddings. I mean, how could Steve be in that creepy group? And then you read it and it's like, wait a minute, this applies to the group that I was in. So that's why I think the success of my book to reach so many people from a diverse number of types of destructive relationships and groups has been, it's been around for over 30 years.
Yeah, it's amazing. So thank you for doing that. I'd like to just make sure that I frame very clearly in giving my story how important it is that I don't want to detract from Daniela's, because her experiences and her observations in the areas that she calls for where the military needs to improve are 100% accurate. Her
Mm-hmm.
experiences, there's nothing that I want to detract from in that way. I think it's important, like you said, for we frame in a difference, both for my gender being a factor in that, and then also the kind of crazy that I came from before I joined,
Mm,
a male dominated military, where it's a lot easier for me to succeed than it would be for her.
mm,
So I think that I owe her definitely that much, that I read her book, and in doing so realized how many similarities we had, even though our lives were so different, and how many times our histories were actually overlapping during deployments and we had no idea. So it was
mm.
quite
And I'll
amazing.
just say for my listeners, the book is called Uncultured. I highly recommend it. And Mike, one day you'll do a book, I hope.
I hope so too. I definitely. It seems like I have plenty to say, so I guess I should get to writing.
For sure. Let me encourage you. So let's go on. So
Okay.
please continue.
Yeah, so just kind of giving that overview, I think it's important to note from a very young age, my father was a wounded Vietnam veteran who was forced to retire after he was made an amputee in combat in Vietnam. He's also a very hard personality and not somebody that I would consider extremely nurturing.
Mm,
So it became very normalized for me at a very young age how important military service was. He's the kind of person that didn't he enlisted, and then he ended up going through officer candidate school and going to Vietnam because he wanted to serve. He
mm-hmm,
was not drafted, which so many people were during that entire conflict.
mm,
So him being forced to retire was one of the biggest regrets of his entire life, and I grew up in the shadow of that.
mm,
So hearing how he wished things were and seeing that even though I saw this person in tremendous pain, him wishing he could still be there was always kind of the highest, most noble, a following or desire that a kid could have. So that was, aside from growing up in the 80s with all of the 80s TV and things of that nature before my family got involved in Scientology, I always sort of had an inclination towards military service. And
mm-hmm,
so he got involved in Scientology because he was looking for relief from things like PTSD, all the post traumatic stress that, there's now starting to be treatments for. He didn't have those available at the time. So he had gone from one self help thing to another. And it just so happened that my parents were on the kick of Scientology when they went through a divorce. My mother ended up then joining the highest levels of Scientology and took me with her out to California. And
mm,
I was raised in the Sea Organization, which is Scientology's kind of paramilitary, almost Vatican level, for lack of a better analogy, service organization where they dedicate themselves, sign these billion-year contracts, live communally, make almost no money, and just dedicate themselves to every meandering thought that L. Ron Hubbard ever had.
Yeah, if I can just highlight a 1 billion-year contract. So that gives you a
Nothing
sense of
suspicious.
the extremeness of this. And previously, I've interviewed other Sea Org escapees who just suffered horrible childhoods because they don't treat children as kids. They think that these are beings that just pick a body and come back. So kids are treated like adults,
Which is
and
very destructive.
highly destructive. Please continue.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was in this organization as my mother moved up the ranks. She was an assistant and secretary to Ronnie Miscavige, which is the leader, David Miscavige's older brother. He was a marketing executive in Scientology and the Sea Organization for a number of years. And my mother, Rosemary, was his secretary. So as
Mm,
he would get promoted up to higher level organizations, so did she. And at first, that meant that I was stuck in Los Angeles by myself, kind of just living with other families, and I could not go with her.
mm,
So for multiple years, I would only see her occasionally on weekends. And then I was just in this cadet organization, which is where they kind of stuff all the kids and kind of put us to work as though we're little adults. We didn't get good schooling. Hubbard didn't believe in a formalized education. And kind of to me, it felt like training you enough to be able to put you to work. We're all fairly well spoken. We have decent vocabularies, but there's no extracurriculars. There's no worldly pursuits. It's all just very minimally academic with very little mathematics that's built into it.
Right.
No history, and whatever he says goes. So eventually, they made a ranch organization closer to the international headquarters where she worked out in Gilman Hot Springs. She was up at the international base. Golden Era Productions is out in Riverside County.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, the children were brought up there so we could be closer to the parents. They didn't have to then commute down to LA on the weekends to see us for a couple hours and go back.
Mm-hmm.
And it was both. It could have been the best of times, but it ended up like all things Scientology. If you're a hammer, eventually everything becomes a nail. They have to work kids. So as opposed to having this opportunity to educate us properly, which is kind of what it started as, although we were the workforce to renovate this dilapidated property, eventually it turned into manual labor for kids.
You were labor trafficked, my friend.
We really were, even though it's kind of hard to say it.
Ministerial exception, because after 25 years of not being a religious status group, through defraud and all kinds of funny business, they've got religious status, but it really is labor trafficking of children, in my opinion.
And I think they've tried to steer away from that because the attrition rate on what happened with us kids, for the most part, when we grew up and we got to an age where we were able to think for ourselves, 25 to 27 years old, most of us left, escaped, got away. And once we've been able to process this, we have a lot of criticisms. So I think they've realized that if they keep it up, they're probably that's going to be one of the nails in the coffin. So they've stopped with the young kids and now they just recruit teenagers, which is still dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. Let me just comment, because I thought I just heard you say that when you turn 26, 27, you could think for yourself. Well, being raised in a mind control authoritarian cult, it's really hard to think for yourself. But I think you were trying to say is what we know from neuroscience is that the frontal cortex, our critical executive functioning, matures at 26 or 27. So at least that part of the brain is more ripe and wanting to think.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification. That's pretty much exactly what I meant.
You get
to a breaking point, and then you're able to piece it all together and realize, wait, I can think my way out of that. And different people did that at different ages, and it's not like at 27 everyone leaves. There's people that were there into their very late senior years, which we'll talk about in my mother's case, where we were only able to get her out of it with very specific circumstances. So when I was 15, kind of going back to this ranch property, I wanted to leave. I was still required to visit my father due to the custody. My mother had custody. I had to go and visit him, part of the divorce decision, 2 weeks a year. And Scientology wanted to just put me to work, and I was supposed to disconnect from him at that time. So they sent me in order to do that, which even violates their own internal policies. He wasn't declared a suppressive person, which is their version of an evil person that they then excommunicate or disconnect from. But they wanted me to work, and they saw him as an external influence. And any cult cannot, outside criticism is something that is they are not able to tolerate. So they needed to deal with me. Meanwhile, my mother's working for one of their executives. So I came back wanting to leave. I wanted to do so in such a way that I was able to still have contact with my mother, which requires going through their process of leaving on their terms. They call it routing out, where they conduct a lot of security checks on you.
With the e-meter, which is a bogus pseudo-scientific device that supposedly measures your galvanic skin response. But come on, please.
And then, but through that, it was just a lot of interrogations and thought reform is really what it consisted of. And I was separated from all of the other kids so that I didn't poison their thinking. And I was really alone and separated for the better part of 16 to 18 months while I was then being interrogated. So it was, I felt very much, I would imagine sometimes that this is what it's like to be a prisoner. And I felt like a prisoner.
Right. And I can't help but comment on your use of the term poison. other people because that's cult words, because they want pure devotees that have no doubts. They
Hmm.
want you to do thought stopping, and it folks, being in a mind control cult sucks. It's just, it's so opposite the human experience that your spirit, your internal self just doesn't like to be abused and manipulated and threatened and exploited. And that's what it is.
It's very there's a lot of complicated thoughts that I have when I reflect back to that period. But after about 2 years of this, I
Mm,
was getting close to the age of 18. I was undereducated. I was being told that I would never be successful in the world, and I was almost beholden to them. So I decided to stay. And when
mhm,
I did, I went all in that I was going to dedicate myself and try to work as hard as I could, which I then went on to work at their international headquarters at Golden Era Productions. I was kind of an assistant or deputy in a lot of different levels, working
mm,
for the Golden Era Productions executives. At one point, I was supposed to become a member of Religious Technology Center.
mm,
Um, I ended up working, did that for a little while. I got in trouble because of some perceived bad thought that I had and was sent down to make e-meters for a couple years. So I was even the manufacturer of those pieces of junk. So I have a lot of understanding of the inner workings of those things. And
mm,
my ex-wife now, who was then working there, she was a makeup artist that would
mm,
take care of all of David Miscavige's makeup at events.
mm,
And she had a bad run-in with him where he was screaming at her about something that was outside of her control, and she mentioned to me that she wanted to leave. And she was the only reason why I was still staying there, and I was ready to go. I wanted to join the military from a young age. When I was 15, that's what I had wanted to do. And I told
mm,
her, we can leave, we can get out of here. And she thought about it for a little bit, and she decided that she would just end up wanting to come back, and we would end up getting divorced.
mm,
So that was the I don't know if I'm assuming that there's a certain tipping point that has to occur in terms of like the amount of abuse and problems that a person can take before they just reach their maximum and they leave. Scientology says that that's always your fault when you do such a thing.
yeah.
I reached the point where I just left,
Mm,
and I was disconnected from, meaning my mother, my now ex-wife, they disconnected from me. I was leaving then at 27 years old with no
mm,
credit history, no money, no. I had barely a degree. The only education that I had was no sort of degree. I had the equivalency GED, but it wasn't even a full GED. It was just enough to drop out
mm.
of school.
Wow.
So it was a bit intimidating. But I also left in 2003, and it's when the Army was recruiting a lot of people.
Mm,
When I showed up at face value, with before I did any of the testing and stuff, I wasn't probably the most desirable recruit. But then once I went through, the different aptitude batteries they put prospective enlistees through, even though I didn't have much education, they said, "Well, you scored really high on a lot of things, so we can offer you a job as an aircraft mechanic." So I did that for a number of years. I was top of my class in basic training through the other training that I got. There is some benefit to going through the military training in your later age. It's not a physical benefit because I had parts that were hurting that younger kids
mm,
were not experiencing,
right.
but I was probably more mature and I was definitely used to dealing with mental stress. So the mental demand was low for me. The physical demand was high for me, but I could
Hmm.
deal with the physical. But the mental was leaps and bounds easier than what I was used to in Scientology. They were
Right.
requiring that I would to eat, to sleep. They were teaching me things. I would even get time off. Like I came from something of such high control that the military, even as a private, was somehow welcoming. And I know that's in sharp contrast to probably what a lot of people felt. But for me, coming in,
Mm,
it gave me opportunities that I could affect on my own merit, which
yep.
is something that I could never influence before that.
Right. That's fascinating. And they taught you a lot. They taught you skills and trades. How did you become a pilot? Did you always want to fly?
I always did want to fly from the age of, and this will only be funny to people that are fly the aircraft that I fly. But when I was 15, I wanted to be an Apache gunship pilot.
Mm.
And later, when I went through flight school, I was very high in my class, and I was able to select Chinooks, which are the large tandem rotor aircraft that we used very much in Afghanistan and Iraq. They have a lot of benefits environmentally. But when the Army has a program, which once you're in and you're able to do testing, and if they find that you have the aptitude and the basic level of education, as long as you score high enough on the exams, they will put you through warrant officer training and then into flight school. So I spent a
Mm-hmm.
couple of years going through that process. Started from the bottom as a very junior pilot, was able to get the aircraft that I wanted. I like the aircraft that I have because it has a very diverse mission.
Mm.
What's interesting, and you had kind of alluded to this, is Daniela's husband, Tom, was in a class, I believe, either like one class or two classes ahead of me. He was so only a month or two ahead of me in flight school. And
Mm.
I knew him in flight school, and we would actually occasionally spend time on the weekends. It's before he knew Daniela. So it's funny how your
Small
paths cross in
world.
these, yeah, very strange ways. And then when I read her book, I was like, wait, do I know this guy? And I'm like, I know Tom. We're Facebook friends. It was kind
Yeah.
of remarkable to
It's
me.
so cool. I got to meet him in person, and man, he was like a gunship pilot, like, gu- suicide missions, almost the way they were describing it. You got to
Yeah,
go down and get these guys. They're being surrounded in an ambush. You got to go rescue them. Who wants to do it? I'll do it. And he would just
right.
buzz off and be courageous. And
Yeah, Tom and I fly the same Chinook helicopter. He flies a variant of it. He joined their special operations unit.
yeah.
It's the 160th Special Operations Unit, and he served there as one of their fully mission qualified pilots for a number of years. So
Mm.
they get the most complex missions, and what they do is very, very amazing. There's a lot of books written about that organization. It's extremely prestigious. So he
Mm.
has my utmost respect. I've been on the end of that when they don't have enough help. When then they ask the conventional helicopters to kind of do a similar mission with not quite as much training, and
Mm.
here I still am though. But
Yeah.
so
But now you train people. That's a lot, much of
yeah,
what
so
you
I've
were.
and kind of what I alluded to, Steve, and the Army for me again. I was coming in a little bit later in life, and I was indoctrinated from a very young age to work at an almost feverish pace as the norm. So for me to go in and work like just at an excessive rate was the normal for me, and that is not normal for most people. I almost do
Mm.
it to the point of wearing myself down.
Mm.
But that gave me a lot of opportunities to succeed in an organization that is looking for people to do work. Unfortunately, when you do extra work, you then end up doing other people's work, and
Mm.
so there's a double-edged sword with that, but that was ingrained from me from my experience as a child all the way up.
Right.
Um, and I have a lot of friends who are arguably a lot more intelligent than I am, but I will probably say that will probably work harder, even if I do it the hardest way possible to get more done. So it gives me that opportunity to then succeed. So I'm being a
Mm.
little self-deprecating, which I like to kind of approach humor that way, but I have learned a lot. Now I'm in a very unique position to be able to train the next generation of pilots on what I now know. Um,
Yes.
so it's something that I very much love. So there are things that I think the military does need to change. It's a very bureaucratic organization, as all federal government things are.
Hmm.
But one thing that I think is worth noting, different from where I came from in Scientology, things like harassment and workplace violence and things of a sexual nature, though those things happen, they are dealt with. Even though there's mistakes on how things happen from time to time, but there are programs that actually exist. And when there are congressional investigations and things of this nature, you do get improvements in these things where it becomes, a cultural change. But
Right.
you're also dealing with a massive change over a very short period of time, which the military evolves slowly, which I think all forms of government do. But we've seen so much societal change that it's
Right.
hard for big organizations to react to that in the way that they probably should be able to.
Yeah. Right. Um, we're all for reform. For me, I always, before I talked with Daniela, just thought, okay, my understanding of boot camp is they break you down, they give you a number, they put you in a uniform, they They challenge you, they yell at you, and do physically, impossible things as a way of breaking down your ego to create a military identity that gets um, refrozen as a good soldier. But what I always thought about when I've talked to veterans is, unlike in Scientology or the Moonies or the Children of God, your pre-military self and your military self is what's called, in my world, egocentric, meaning you like your military self still likes your real self, versus when you're in a mind control cult. I was taught, my real self was satanic and fallen and terrible, and so that's ego dystonic.
Hmm.
And so that's one big difference from my point of view in the military versus an authoritarian cult. But the other thing is that most, people of the country really support and are appreciative of the service and the sacrifices that people do to put their lives in danger and protect our freedoms and go up against dictators and such. And so that's a difference. And then I'll say, in the military, you are asked to sign a contract to enlist for a certain amount of time. You get paid, you have a certain amount of benefits. You can choose to rejoin or you can exit with honor. That never happens in a mind control cult. They
Right.
never want you to leave, right? They want to
Yeah.
keep you forever.
You're like property.
Right. And then, in the military, there's a system of justice, even though it may be imperfect. There's a set of rules and guidelines to prevent abuse of power, which also never happens in authoritarian cults. And I've just heard so many horror stories about David Miscavige abusing people physically, psychologically, emotionally, just ruining people's lives. So I just wanted to add a little bit more from my perspective, that I really think we do need a military. I do think we need to have methods and techniques to train people. But I think you and I, in a previous conversation, and myself with Daniela, we talked about how the military could do a much better job at helping people who do want to exit the military to rejoin society, because so many
Right.
people are leaving, they're having PTSD, they're not getting the treatment or the support that they need. So that's
Yeah,
another area to
right.
improve.
And with the war that happened for so long, and I don't really want to get into my exact feelings about it, but you have a lot of people that dedicated a lot of time for different reasons. There's a very diverse demographic that joins the military. You have people from all walks of life. So going through that boot camp experience kind of normalizes everybody down from, your preppy kids to your former gang members that might be then enlisting and trying to get a new life for themselves. And it makes
Mm,
everybody equals.
right,
So it does create that, but it's also creating that, I think, for the reason of making you part of this machine where you're able to go and do unthinkable things to make sure that you're in service of our country. That, I think, the implied task on that is that for the politicians and the people in the position to utilize our military, the who we choose to do what is so very important because
mm,
they have so much control over such a powerful force.
right,
So there's a lot there, and then there's a lot of, we could go down a lot of rabbit holes on that, but that is a universal statement that has nothing to
right,
do with any particular person. That is a burden and a very important one, so that we're not wasted. And unfortunately, in Afghanistan, it had gone on for so many decades that at deployment after deployment, we started, we could see what we're doing mission to mission on, kind of the micro level, but the macro level was very confusing. And I think it was
right,
confusing from a national perspective.
right, was,
So, but going forward, and I wish there was a world where we never needed a military, but we
sure,
do have forces in the world where we have to be in a position to be able to defend our way of life, even if it's a deterrent. And I hope that it always will just be that.
yeah,
Um, but I feel, a necessary evil. But during the surge in the war effort, there were people coming in and leaving at such an unbelievable rate. It was hard for a system that is still a bureaucratic, Veterans Administration system to process people. Also, it's hard for people to admit when they're broken, even if they're
Oh,
dealing with stuff. Compartmentalization.
yeah,
Maybe they're compartmentalizing right now, but 6 years from now, when they process everything that happened and internalize it, it might break
right.
them. And they're trying to work out mechanisms for really trying to figure out as we go forward how to identify the help people need, but it's an overburdened system with not enough help in it. So it's
Yep.
imperfect. I have friends that have gotten out, and I think if you find any service member, there's always a joke in the military. People will always complain. If they stop complaining, then you should be concerned.
Mm,
Um, but but that's another thing in the military, like you're allowed to, voice, an objection that you have about something, as long as it's kind of administrative in nature. When you're in a mission oriented posture, you can't question what you're doing. When there's an
right,
order that's given, you can clarify the order as long as it's not an illegal order, but sometimes that order might put your life in danger. It's
right,
just, it's a unique organization. Another thing about the military is, it is discriminatory on a physical level if you don't meet certain physical criteria. If you
mm,
have flat feet, you can't serve. If you're not able to do X, Y, and Z, you're not able to do these certain things. And I think the difference between where women are allowed to serve and where they're not, that has been a slowed process, because historically there's been so much um, there's so many cultural shifts that have happened that they
right.
haven't kept up with that. And the military, I think, is trying to address that a bit at a time. And I don't want to speak out of turn on it, but I just want to continue to appreciate Daniela. Not only, if anyone reads her book, this woman was outperforming men on a physical level when she was maybe 100 pounds soaking wet and they couldn't keep up with her. She was a force to be reckoned with, but also coming from a very different background than I came from. Um, so
But I want to
anyway.
just highlight, because I've talked with her and I'm talking with you. You were programmed to work your asses off, like just extraordinary levels that average young people would go, "What? You did what?" No one would ever make
My kids
me.
don't work like that.
Yeah, I mean, but because you were programmed and conditioned to expect this is normal, because nobody told you as a kid this isn't normal. By the way, you're being, run to ragged. Um, you did perform exceptionally, and she did perform exceptionally. And as you were saying just a minute ago, it was like I was used to this. Of
Right.
course, I could
Want to
do
be
that.
absolutely clear. I could not keep up with Daniela in a race. That woman would absolutely leave me in all of the dust. So just so we're
She was
100%
a
clear on that.
runner. Yes.
Oh, yeah,
That was
and a
part of her
phenomenal one.
story. It's great.
But
So I want to,
so
yeah, go ahead, please.
well, so leaving, I finally get out and I leave the whole Scientology thing very much behind me. There were very few people speaking out. It was not a safe environment to be able to bring a complaint forward in a public way without Scientology viciously attacking you and trying
Mm-hmm.
to ruin your life. And I was also very focused on trying to make a life for myself. I
Mm.
didn't want to be their stereotypical flipping burgers at McDonald's, which is this weird thing that David Miscavige, their leader, always says is the worst thing in the world. Which I love to cook burgers now. Anyway, but I went nose down and focused for the better part of 20 years, with none of my further life connected to anymore, and which
Mm,
included my mother, which I was very close to. She disconnected from me, and
mm,
I thought she was very much there because she wanted to be there, and I had no access to her, or very little communication that I would ever hear what she was doing, because she was also out of touch with her brothers and sisters, of which it was a large Catholic family that she grew up, in the
mm,
40s. So then they were all very close, except for she's in this cult, and it was just the weird thing of Rosemary's in the
mm.
cult. Um,
Can I ask,
so
did you reconnect
please,
with her family when you left the group? Because they were not in Scientology, or you didn't
I
even
did,
know
yeah.
them.
I knew them a little bit from my early childhood. Again, my father being kind of over controlling. his kind of demeanor was similar to a cult demeanor in that he isolated her from her family. So she was almost predisposed to go into a cult and feel that that was normal as well.
Mm.
But I did reconnect with my aunts and uncles, and I have a whole mess of cousins. Several of my cousins, I have one in the Air Force, one in the Coast Guard. They're both doing exceptionally well for themselves. And then there's just a lot of family that I've been able to connect to, and we are very close now. But I always approached that very cautiously so that I didn't create a problem for my mother. I knew the kind of backstory and background that she was in, but I wanted her to have her right to believe what she wanted to believe, kind of, as long as she's doing her thing and I'm doing mine, I'm okay with it. But I was naive in my belief that she was being taken care of properly. When I had left, she was in her 50s. And then before you know it, she is coming up on 65. So finding out what happened to her, which is a long story, but I'll try to paraphrase it if
Yeah,
you
tell
want me
us.
to. So
Definitely.
when at a certain point when she was working for this leader's brother, he started engaging in quid pro quo, inappropriate workplace touching of a sexual nature. And when it was found out about, she was punished and he was let to go back to work.
Hmm.
And she was put basically down into a menial job. And after I then escaped from this organization, they then sent her to their thought reconditioning camp when she was about 59, almost 60 years old, called the Rehabilitation Project Force
Oh,
down.
the
So
RPF.
the RPF, they sent her to the RPF in Los Angeles, where she lived, like, worked around the clock, was not allowed to talk to anyone. It's thought reconditioning and heavy manual labor, which she was on for the next 6 years.
Oh, God.
Um, and she was having heart conditions during this time. She was, experiencing shortness of breath, probably having many heart attacks. When she was 65, they let her off of it and made her the cleaner of their dining room. And then she had a heart attack. I was in Afghanistan at the time, and I found out about it by brothers and sisters. And I kind of came back just to see her in the hospital with all of her handlers around her. I'm
Mm.
sure you kind of know what that's like. They
Mm.
never let anyone out by themselves, even if they're in the ICU.
Right.
And she had to get triple bypass surgery. They then were handling all of her care. They said they'd take care of her. I was naive enough to believe them. But they really just had her kind of put in their building without proper care. When she wasn't being taken care of properly, she was low on her meds, trying to recover from heart surgery. She had started to accumulate a little bit of money, which they don't pay their staff more than about $47 a week. But she had started to
That's
get Social Security
crazy.
payments.
Mm-hmm.
So she had a couple $1,000s, and then they realized that and started having her pay for their counseling services they refer to as auditing. So they were
Mm.
having her pay for it, which she should have been getting for free as a member of their C organization, and they were harvesting her money.
Mm.
That they went on to do that, to collect massive amounts for the International Association of Scientologists, continue to take her money until there was no money left. Several years later, they then started running other staff members' credit cards for more of this auditing for her, because it's not only about delivering the auditing, but it's also about like they have to deliver the auditing and get the money for it in order to get their statistics up. So they were just using their old people. They're not just doing it just to her. There's many, many people in the same category. They were doing this, and then they started opening up credit cards in her name, falsifying not only her income but her assets, saying she owned homes when she didn't. And then they were still working her around the clock, like 7 days a week. She would get up early in the morning till late at night. She wouldn't get breaks. She wasn't being well taken care of. She's stuffed into a room with several other old people sleeping on bunk beds. It was horrible. At some point, she collapses and they think she has a stroke, but she's just almost worked to death, very dehydrated. She goes to the hospital and is then put into a hospice facility. And when she's in it, it's a hospice facility off their campus because they were scared that she would pass away there and they would have to call emergency services. Like EMTs, seeing how everyone's living in those buildings would be very problematic. So they put her in a hospice facility, which is uncharacteristic because that requires this expenditure of money. But when she was in that, she had access to the normal world and she wasn't being reindoctrinated daily. At some point, she decided to reach out to me. I was very careful with her. You know, there was nothing anti-Scientology that we had talked about until she started complaining to me about the things that she had been through, at which I started documenting them. And she watched the series Leah Remini, Scientology in the Aftermath, that Leah produced.
Mm,
Um, that did not um, repair the indoctrination, but it let her see other people's experiences. But she still believed in Hubbard despite seeing the 3 seasons of that. When she finally watched Alex Gibney's documentary that from Lawrence Wright's books, Going Clear in Scientology and the Prison of Belief, and
right.
she realized the fraud that was Hubbard, she had a visceral reaction to it and was like, I need to get out of here. So over the next several months, we were able to, this was during COVID, so we were able to get medical power of attorney in place without Scientology knowing. So I was able to control her through a lot of hard work from Claire Headley and the Aftermath Foundation. We were able to get the funds in place in order to get her into a care facility.
Right.
Senior living is not cheap. But we were able to go in and extract her from this location. And I had some very close friends help me that I had grown up with. One was L. Ron Hubbard's granddaughter, and the other one was one of David Miscavige's nephews. We went in there, treated it like, you know, I would do a military operation, got in, got out, and we're out of there in 15 minutes and on a plane.
So
So,
other escapees from your childhood helped you rescue your mom.
yeah, that are one is a Miscavige and the other one's a Hubbard.
Great story. See, that's part of a book and a movie, I think.
It's got to be, right?
This is
Anyway.
really important. And I just want to highlight that I hear from sometimes from people who say, oh, my mom's been in it for 20 years, or my mom's been in it for 30 or 40 years. It's too late. And I said, if they're still breathing, it's not too late. And
That is completely
you
true.
know, it's like if you have a chance to be free, you know, it's so precious and it's so wonderful. And to have loving children like yourself, who's like, I'm here for you, Mom. I'll put my work aside and do what needs to take to get you to safety. And the fraud you described about her, it's elder abuse, it's criminal fraud that you were describing. Tell us what you did after
We'll
that once
maybe
you got your
mark
mom
this
to
part of the,
safety.
yeah. Um, yeah, so getting her out, it was very hard. And none of this we didn't know about any of this before. It was like slowly uncovered. And one thing that was so remarkable is she she knew there was something wrong, but she didn't understand the depth of what was wrong. So
Mm-hmm.
when she would tell me something, I would be like shocked. I'm like, wait, what are you telling me? What do you mean a credit card? What do you, and then you start to, like Scientology says, you got to pull the string and get deeper and deeper on it. When they investigate people, that's what they say.
Mm,
But as I would start to uncover more and more, it was finding out that the depravity went deeper and deeper and deeper. And and she and it's very hard for her to understand what was right and what was wrong because they were in complete control of all of her information.
right,
So when she was there working for 35 years with no external connections, no internet, no news, no paper, no nothing, you're just working, and they're telling you about how much
right,
Scientology is expanding. It's um it's a stilted version of reality, and they're told that there's millions of followers and they're expanding at an unprecedented rate. Meanwhile, they're about to close their doors.
right,
So, yeah,
right. And just for my listeners, people in this cult actually think that they're on this mission to clear the planet and there'll be no crime and no disease and no poverty, and that you live many lifetimes, which is the billion year commitment. Sorry.
if only, right?
The cult has got billions of dollars, I'm told.
Yeah,
Miscavige does. And I'm on a quest, I know you are too, to make sure they lose their tax exemption status because they've been using it to cover up criminal activities that they've been doing systematically for decades.
absolutely. Like when these executives went back, because at one point, Scientology was denied tax exemption by the Supreme Court. And then the executives, David Miscavige and the people working for him at that time, did a lot of underhanded maneuvering in order to get the IRS to fold and to just give them their tax exempt status back. And that was filing, suits against individual IRS agents, harassing the government. And they say, we'll make it all go away if you just let us be a church and give us tax exempt status. So that is the benchmark for if somebody deserves religious protections, is the IRS is the one that's going to basically rubber stamp that. And that is I guess the benchmark for all of the First Amendment protections. And with that, it provides them a tremendous amount of cover under the Constitution, which for me, in my time in military service, I've vowed to support and defend the constitutions against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I feel very strongly about that. So for an organization to weaponize the Constitution in a way, when you can clearly see that they are a for-profit entity that is doing everything they can to make money and take advantage of people, and then try to spin it as though they're so great, but not actually providing a public benefit, it's very hard to process.
Yeah. So I have to do a shout out to John Atack, a colleague and dear friend since 1989, who wrote Let's Sell Them a Piece of Blue Sky, which is a definitive research on Hubbard and his past that many other books, Russell Miller, Janet Reitman, Lawrence Wright, all used for their information. But I also want to say that I interviewed Larry Brennan, and then later Larry became Denise Brennan. I did 2 videos, but he was commissioned directly by Hubbard to make it into a religion. And he actually wrote a booklet that's on my website about the fraud of Miscavige. Like, this was just an operation that was created to make the IRS do their will.
And now it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle, because there's a lot of different people that have a lot of criticisms of their individual faiths or religions, and there's some religions that are more established than other ones. But I think that it's probably dangerous territory for some religions to support, even if they don't like Scientology, to support looking into them, because that same thing could apply to them. So even the large religions like, Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, which are just straight up a cult. I'm not saying Mormonism is. I'm not trying to go down any path of speak outside. But I've seen a lot of documentaries where there is definitely some cult behavior going on with this. They don't want to open themselves up to the scrutiny. So politicians that come from these lines of faith, it's a slippery slope if it's going to affect their wallet. So unfortunately, I think religion is something that's easily weaponized as population control. And for me, I've struggled to try to figure out how to plug into that. If it's organized religion, it's not for me. I can tell you that right now. So.
Well, for me, I'll just say, because, I got rescued 47 years ago, I was motivated to do my doctoral dissertation on my bite model of authoritarian control, which you read about in Combating. I knew it was helping people leave cults for 30 years, but a professor said, you need to show it's a scientifically validated construct to create a framework for the law to evaluate what's a healthy religion and what's an unhealthy religion, and have a criteria that's scientifically valid. Because healthy religion, from my take, is in supporting your individuality and free will, allowing you to ask questions. It's love-based. It's informed consent. It allows you access to other forms of information that the group necessarily doesn't want you to know about, so you can think for yourself, and you can leave without threat or harassment. So there are real qualities, virtues of a healthy religion versus these authoritarian cults that want to create a pseudo-identity that's dependent and obedient, and they use coercion, behavior control, information, thought, and emotional control to enforce and coerce people to be slaves and work for long hours for little or no money. So for me, I agree with you. It is a big threat to a whole lot of people that want, including the advertising industry, that wants to say, there's no such thing as mind control, or who can say it's a slippery slope. And I'm saying, no, we actually have a very easy to understand formula for examining what's healthy and what's not healthy. And frankly, I think that's what the future needs to happen, that people need to not just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say all religion is, bogus, but say there are good churches, good synagogues, good mosques, and there are extremist, terrorist, authoritarian ones too.
Yeah. What's one thing I was thinking about as you were going through that is how much I was able to tolerate and even enjoy military indoctrination. If
Mm.
I'll just say that I enjoyed it because I did enjoy my training, but if you really want to get down to it, it is indoctrination to a certain degree. But even now, if I go to a church service, and I probably identify mostly with a Christian belief system,
Mm-hmm.
as soon as it gets into um, the lecturing and the indoctrination aspect of it, where they're trying to sell an idea where they're pulling different pieces and you can kind of loosely understand what they're doing, that level of indoctrination I'm very resistant to.
Yeah.
So you can yell at me and make me crawl through mud, and I'm all about that. But if you want to, while I'm sitting down in a nice warm room singing songs, if you want to indoctrinate me, I'm very resistant to it.
Us former members, we have our antenna up for anything that smacks of coercion, lying, manipulation, exploitation, guilt tripping. It's like life's too short for that stuff. And frankly, for me, life is growth and learning and changing your mind and evolving, not just having certainty and closing your mind to every new idea and every person that isn't what you believe, involved with something that you believe in. That
Mm,
for me, that's just suffocating. It's just like the opposite of a healthy
right.
environment. So how's your mom? You got her away, and didn't you succeed in getting some money out of them?
Yeah. So what's been nice is there's these things called bank records. It's crazy. When they take money, it actually shows. And when the Advanced Organization or Los Angeles or the International Association of Scientologists does massive, you know, withdrawals from accounts, or you open up weird credit card stuff, they keep records of these things. Who would have thought so? But we were able to document all of this down to the penny. And we had some help from some good lawyers. Graham Barry was working with both Brad Edwards and Brittany Henderson, who were most notable supporting the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. And they
Mm.
represented my mother to send Scientology a demand letter. And they said, hey, this is the stuff you took from her. They had harvested over the course of a little over 10 years over $163,000 from a person that they were only paying $47 a week to. And they were even getting that money that they were giving her back, 163,000. So we were able to get some money back as soon as Scientology saw that. It's kind of irrefutable, and they are not ones to give money back. But more recently, Graham Barry's had a lot of success in sending these things that are obviously financial crimes, and they're 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 quick to give the money back in hopes that it won't turn into a bigger suit. So now, with the amount of legal pressure that's being put on from various lawsuits that are both trafficking in nature that are in place for Scientology, and also Leah Remini has one for them that she's dealing with a civil suit against all of their fair gaming and stuff that she's dealt with on that. There's a lot of pressure on this, and at some point, something's got to break loose. They have these arbitration agreements. Any organization that's saying we're going to help you and then asking you to sign agreements giving your rights away, you should immediately be very, very concerned about that. And Scientology does that with all of its members. So at some point, there's going to be a crack in that dam, and I think they're going to have hell to pay when it
Yeah,
happens.
I feel like the crack has already occurred with the conviction of Danny Masterson, because the women he abused and raped were able to appeal to judges that they should not be forced to have to arbitrate when they were criminally, harmed, and he's in jail for
Right.
the rest of his life. So I think the clock is ticking on this cult, and nothing would make me happier for David Miscavige to be sentenced to 120 years in jail like Keith Raniere was.
I think they could be cellmates. They would absolutely love their time together. I can tell you, they would have so much to talk about.
Well, interestingly, Raniere used hypnosis on his members, and Hubbard was a hypnotist, although I'm not sure David Miscavige knows that, as a fact. John Atack documented it. But, and I wrote about it with John, in fact, about the hypnosis piece. But it's so fascinating. And, being a former member and not being afraid to share your story, it's a very important public service, especially in 2024, because there's so many people whose minds have gotten hacked by radical ideas and conspiracy theories. And unfortunately, the public goes, oh, they're stupid or weak or there's something wrong with them. But when we can present ourselves, share our stories, you're obviously very intelligent, very accomplished person. We can destigmatize the notion in people's minds that there's something wrong with you if you're involved with a cult. But
Right.
in many ways, you have less of a need to defend yourself because you were brought in as a child. I got
Yeah.
recruited at 19. I just got honeypotted by women flirting with me during a vulnerable moment of my life. And I thought I was too smart to ever be, brainwashed or recruited by a
Yeah.
cult.
For sure. Yeah, something that I think is important to note, there is a lot of people that are speaking out, and the environment to do so has become safer. And when John Atack wrote his book and books like his, there was a lot of criticism, and Scientology fought against people like John very, very hard. There were journalists that were brave enough to speak out at the time, and then Leah did her documentary series of Scientology in the aftermath, and it slowly has become, people have seen that, like, hey, I can speak out and I'm going to be okay.
Right.
And now there is a large presence on social media, both in TikTok and Twitter, and then also on YouTube. There are a lot of YouTube personalities that are kind of cropping up, and it's a lot of the kids that I grew up with. I even decided to share my mother's story on my own channel because we can tell our stories and no one's going to filter it. No
Right.
one's going to edit it. We can tell it long format, which I think there is a desire for people to consume as they want to. So as these social media platforms are making it able for people to share their truth,
Yep.
Scientology is not able to deal with this.
Right.
And
Yeah, I was so very happy about Leah and Mike Rinder's aftermath, and I was actually a guest on the after the end of the first season, which was surreal for me to sit next to Mike Rinder. I started to cry. I was like, I can't believe it. I was afraid of you for decades. You harassed my friends and made them miserable. And here we are, we're dissing Scientology together on TV. It's amazing. And I'll just
yeah,
say there are so many documentaries now on different cults. There's a hunger in the public for learning more about these extreme groups. So there's Heaven's Gate, there's the Larry Ray cult, there's the Synanon cult, there's Love Has Won, Twin Flames Universe, Nexium had two series. I mean, I could go on. And they're
hmm
more in production coming our way.
yeah.
So final words, buddy. Thank you for your service. Thank you for being you, and thank you for sharing. But final words. What else? Anything else that
Um,
we missed?
I think just in summary, I think because of course my hobby horse and or my axe to grind is with Scientology and the what I endured as a child, but more so for the story for my mother's story. I have created a channel on YouTube. If you just look up Mike Brown 101, I think it's both comical in that I was in the 101st Airborne, and I think 1984 Room 101 speaks to Scientology's mind control efforts. So there's a little play on words there, but Scientology is going to be held accountable on child abuse, on elder abuse, and on financial crimes. Those three things, if people are exposing it, they're doing the right work. So that's what we need to focus our efforts on. And I'm going to continue doing so. I have this amazing opportunity to have my mother back for as long as she's able to be with us, where she's able to share her story with me. I'm able to not only document it, but we're starting to bring her stories, to YouTube so that she can tell her own truth in her
Wow.
way. And it feels so nice to be able to help her do that, because people can relate to that on a personal level. And then it's not just hypotheticals, but it's specifics from a specific person. And I'm glad to be able to help her do that. And I'd just like to, if you wouldn't mind, I would just like to promote Daniela's book one more time.
Sure, Uncultured.
Uncultured.
Yeah, Daniela
Yeah.
Masterneck Young's Uncultured, and I believe she's working on another book.
Yeah, she's
But
brilliant.
I
So
want people to go to your YouTube and watch and share. And this whole the elder abuse piece is huge. I'll do a shout out for a nonprofit in California called Elder Justice Cal, CAL for California.org. And it's an aging population in the United States, and so there's a lot of taking advantage of people, especially people
yeah,
who weren't raised in the digital realm. So AI is scamming elderly people using the sound of the voices of their grandchildren. Grandma, I need your help. Give me your
oh my
credit card
goodness.
number. But their actual voice was hacked off of the internet. So
Wow,
there's a lot of abuse
it's
happening.
dangerous.
Yep.
Well, for Scientology, their population and their C organization is either extremely young, that has been, a lot of them recruited from third world countries, or they're aging out and are now elderly. And
Yeah.
as they get Social Security payments, those Social Security payments are not going to the betterment of their living situation. Scientology
Mm.
is getting that money taken. So the situation that happened with my mother, and part of my, drive to do something about this, is she has a lot of friends she left behind who are in the same situation she is. And if my complaining about it even improves their life, I think it's worth me doing it. So we'll see.
And I want to do a shout out as we wrap up for Jeffrey Augustine's Scientology Money Project. He's been after money abuse issues and the tax exemption for as long as I know him. Very bright former member, PI and a journalist, married to Karen de la Carrière, who was one of the most highly trained auditors in the cult. So, Michael Brown, thank you so much. And
Thanks,
hope to
Steve. I
meet
really
you
appreciate
in
it.
the real world sometime, in real
I look forward
life.
to it.
And you did say something about maybe you could get me into a simulator for a
Yeah.
helicopter.
If you come to me, I'm sure I can
That would
sneak
be
you in,
that would be so fantastic if that could happen. That would be psyched. Thank you very much, and
Thank
come
you, sir.
back for another episode of the Influence Continuum. Bye. Steve Hassan here. It's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the super thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind, only you should control it.